process with earthhealing.info, and we are running a series on how-to. And today we're meeting Jack Stickney from here in Estill County, and he is an expert on growing shiitake mushrooms. And so he'll tell us a little something about what they are, and then he's going to show us the tools used and the first processes in going about the growing. Welcome, Jack, to the program.
All right. Well, thank you, Father Al.
Okay, and well, I'll let you take it over.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'm glad to see you guys come out here on this kind of a rainy day in here in March 26th, 2015. And I'm going to show you the whole process. I've been growing shiitake mushrooms now for about 28 years.
Is he loud enough?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what I plan on doing is showing you the whole process of how we grow shiitake mushrooms the natural way on natural logs is the way we've been growing them. So I'll take you through the whole process, through the inoculation, the materials that we use, and then we get a chance, we'll go out over to the log yard and actually see the shiitakes growing and how they grow on the logs over the years. But first thing with shiitake growing, shiitake mushrooms, shiitake is it's a wood-growing mushroom, and I believe in Japanese where originally the whole process began, where they're natural to in Southeast Asia. The Japanese, I think shiitake means oak-growing mushroom, and probably about 100 years ago, about that, they figure out how to grow them commercially, and that's what we're doing here. They're not native to North America or anywhere, but they certainly grow great around here, and as far as I know, they haven't naturalized. But the whole process involved is getting your spawn, which you buy from different vendors. Field and Forest Products is who I bought this particular one from. Mushroom People is another one. But when you buy the spawn, I buy it in what they call the sawdust way. You can also buy them in these little wooden plugs. But the sawdust I find is the best way that you see here. The spawn is the mycelium of the mushroom. And they produce these in a sterile environment, and they introduce the spawn, and it grows throughout the whole bag. And like mushrooms, the spawn is the roots. It's 95% of the organism, the spawn, and the mycelium, that's the roots in it. And actually the mushrooms are the fruiting part of this particular organism. But so we get the sawdust, and then I use these tools, inoculating devices, and you just plug them, and I'll show you this all earlier. And you put these little plugs of the sawdust and spawn into these logs, and I'll show you here in a minute. And you put about 30 or 40 of these little plugs in there. Now spawn gets into the logs, and it grows out through the log, and eventually, within a year, that whole log is completely saturated with the mycelium, and at that time it'll be. So you can see here, I just drilled this through, and I'm using a drill. It's kind of a special one. It's a disc angle drill. It's a high-speed drill, and the bit I'm using it's a specialty bit that I buy through this company. And really, you don't have to buy this specialty bit. It's got a stop on it, goes in a little over an inch. It's just the ideal one. But where I bought this one is through this Field and Forest magazine. But it's a 7/8 diameter, and it fits well with this inoculator tool that you can buy through this company also. So if you're doing the spawn with the sawdust mycelium, you need this inoculator device. But again, the first 10 years I was doing this, I was buying those wooden plugs that have the mycelium in it, and all you need is that size diameter bit and then a hammer, and you're hammered in. You don't need a $30 tool, but it goes a lot quicker with that tool, and it's really cheaper in the long run if you go that way. But so those are the basic tools, and when I started the first few years, I just used a cordless drill with a simple stop on it on the bit. Or you can wrap duct tape around the inch or so as far as you want to go in. You don't really need this high-tech equipment, really. But since I'm doing around 300, 400, 500 logs a year, it goes quicker. But your normal household, 30 logs would be all you need, 1 bag of spawn, and in a year you'll have plenty of mushrooms for the family. You know, you can just kind of get in. I'll do a row, and you can kick in, and then I'll finish.
Very
I'll
good.
start talking to you. Kind of the reason I'm doing it a couple times is make sure I get that plug filled up in there, so when I inject the spawn, the whole plug gets in there. So, in doing this, you can see I get kind of quick at it. But when I started, I was a lot slower. But in time, you get better at it. So the whole idea again is to get that mycelium in contact with the wood. And the whole idea for the wax, you can see I'm doing it. I just use a paintbrush, and I dabble just enough to cover it. And you want to make sure it's not too hot, because you don't want to. If it's sizzling when you do it, it's too hot. You don't want to kill the mycelium. So really, you want it where it's liquid. And this is getting a little hard, but you just want to cover that hole up and cover the mycelium plug up. And like I said earlier, you just use any type of wax that you can find. It holds on pretty well. And when we're looking at the rest of the log, we'll see in time some of the wax falls off.
And with that size of log, you're able to do 4 rows. With a smaller log, do you just you'll do whatever? Is there a rule with that?
Yeah, the spacing, really, you want to have it 3 or 4 inches apart. And you want each row maybe 5 or 6 inches apart. So a diameter log like that, you'll have 2, maybe 3 rows. Diameter like this will be 4. And some of these bigger logs, I'll have 5, 6, 7 rows on them and stuff. So you want to get a good even spacing out throughout the whole log.
Go ahead.
You can see the wax here. When I'm doing it, I put it on a hot plate, and I usually use a couple of cans, but just to keep it where it's good and liquid and be used.
But not too hot.
But like I said earlier, not too hot because you don't want to kill the mycelium, but hot enough so it spreads on quite easily. Cheese wax is really the ideal wax to use, but you know when you have as many as I'm doing, I find that I don't really need it. But ideally, if you have a few, go ahead and get the cheese wax if you can. Here it's got the good mushrooms on it. You can see
Yeah,
them coming
point out some mushrooms. Oh, I see them now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So this right here is one of our log yards, and you can see they're in the fruiting position. This is the way we put them. This is where we keep them all the time. Every year you should flip them once or twice so you're keeping that moisture level constant in the log. But if you look at these logs, most of these are white oaks.
When you say slip, are you turning them upside down?
Flip them upside down, yeah.
Okay.
Let me show you. See, like this white oak log here, you can see it's kind of dry there, but on the bottom, a lot of times, that white stuff you'll see here, that's the mycelium growing in there.
Wow.
And that's a way to check, make sure your log is growing well. And this time of year, they usually turn white. We'll find some more probably all covered in mycelium. But so I just flip them every year, a couple times sometimes. Oh yeah, there's a good looking mushroom. You can see the shiitakes are just coming on for the first time this year. Here it is late March. This is normally about the first time they naturally fruit. With the change of the weather, the temperature, and the humidity levels, that usually causes a force or a fruiting, where we call it a flush when they're coming on.
Now is that the brown down there on the second log or third log?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's.
Nice one there.
And I picked one off.
That's a beauty.
Why don't you bring it over and show the thing? Some people have never seen.
And these are really nice shiitakes here. This
Yeah.
time of year you tend to get the cracked caps, which is really coveted by the people that really like mushrooms. This is really excellent quality. You can see how the skirt here, which is the material on the cap here, when that pulls away and you can start seeing the gills of the mushroom, that's the prime time to pick them. These will get bigger, they'll flatten out, but this is the way you want to pick them. They don't get any better than these right here.
How often do you pick?
Well, we pick as they come like this.
Oh, and they hit hit that level and.
Normally this time of year we'll come out every day
Oh,
and we'll
nice.
check them. And
And that's all through April?
All through March and April, yeah.
You'll come out every day?
Yes, every day, and then in the fall, usually in late October, November, we'll get a fall fruiting. Generally twice a year, but sometimes you'll get them during the summer, depending if you have a long cool spell. And so you got to monitor your logs all the time. I mean, we've missed many a mushroom out here because we didn't catch them in time. But
Well,
How much span of time do you have on the mushroom? Is it a week or a couple of days?
Generally, it'll be a week or two when you get these major flushes. Sometimes during a good year, a major flush, we'll pick 50 pounds of mushrooms, one of our
50
biggest
pounds,
flushes.
wow.
And that's without soaking them. These are just naturally laying them, let them go. Sometimes larger producers or somebody that wants mushrooms at a certain time, you can take your log and soak it for 24 hours in cold water, and then take it out, set it up, and that's called forcing them to fruit. And we do that a lot of times when we have an order during a certain time of year. And I'll do that all year long. I'll put them in the wintertime, I'll soak them, put them in the kiln or in the warm area in the greenhouse, and I'll be able to get them in the wintertime. Summertime, you can soak them and force them anytime you want.
Is this a cooler part of your property? In other words, does the snow melt later? Is it on later?
This is definitely a cooler spot. This is kind of facing the west right here. Okay. And that's a good point. Where you're locating your logs, you want them in an area of maximum moisture and limited sunlight. The worst thing that can happen to a mushroom log is for the log to dry out. So you really it's critical that it stays moist, not necessarily wet, but moist. That's probably the biggest problem with growing these are people who let their logs completely dry out, which will kill the mycelium. So it needs to be under a deep canopy with a lot of ferns, mosses, very limited sunlight, and then probably I know a lot of people that I've given logs to or bought them. They put them in their yards in suburbia, and the sun gets to it. They land up against a brick wall or something, and they'll dry out. You know? So that's the number one most critical thing, is keeping them moist and not having them in the sunlight.
You stack some by leaning them, and you stack some more checkerboard-like back there. Is there a reason for that?
Absolutely. Those logs there in that pile that stacked crisscross is what we call the incubation period. We put them in that type of a stack for about 6 months. We leave them like that because they're in a tight formation, limited amount of sunlight, and so there's maximizing the growth of the mycelium. And after 6 months or this fall, we put them in the fruiting positions where you can reach the mushrooms as they produce.
Do you water those in summertime sometimes?
I don't. Some people do, especially if they're in an area that tend to dry out, a windy area, like say in the Midwest, where they grow them, it tends to be drier. Here in Kentucky, 40, 50 inches of rainfall generally, we don't have to worry about that. But some people do.
Well, what is it? You said for 6 months for the crisscross.
Right.
Do you start those in spring or in fall?
Yeah, I do all my plugging in the early spring, late winter. You want to cut your logs when the logs are in dormant. So you cut them in the wintertime and then plug them within a month or so. The quicker the better after you've cut them down. But it's got to be a fresh log for when you're plugging them, and it's got to be recently cut. So you don't want anything that's been down for a year or anything. It's got to be a fresh log.
And that's because other mycelium or other funguses will take the log over or something?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You want to get it inoculated with your Shiitake mycelium as quick as you can.
And being wet probably is good, right?
Yeah, having it moist and wet, yeah. So the whole process, cut your logs in the wintertime, plug them late winter, spring, put them in the fruiting position for 6 months, in the inoculation position, 6 months, and then after that, in the fall, put them in the fruiting position and leave them like this. Some people in a windy, dry area will lay them on the ground and maybe put a brick on the end of it and have it close to the ground where you get less wind drying it.
And so you've created a kind of a lean-to system. It looks like you with just down logs, right? Or
right. Well,
that's nice. I mean,
here on our farm, we're all about using what we have here and sustainably. We have a lot of cedar trees. We have a lot of moist areas on the farm. We have a lot of these oak logs that need to be thinned out of the woods, and so everything is is done from the farm on the farm, and we try to live a sustainable life here on the farm too.
One more question. So when you do pick when you get your 50 pounds, I presume you don't have a mushroom basket. You keep them in paper bags or?
Yeah, when we're picking
what's
them, we'll pick them in a little basket or in a plastic bag or a box or something, and we gather them, and then we take them immediately to the refrigerator. 'Cause
Okay,
these really
okay.
need to be refrigerated as soon as possible, and you don't want to freeze them, and you want to keep them in a paper bag or a box. You don't want a plastic bag because that'll make them sweat. They don't last as long. One of the good things about these shiitakes here, they're dry, good shape. They'll last 2 to 3 weeks in the crisper of your refrigerator or in your refrigerator. You know, so they have a long shelf life. If you get them like this, make sure you store them in a paper bag, and you don't want to, when you're preparing them, you don't really want to wash them off because they're very porous and they suck up a lot of moisture. Best
So you don't wash them off?
no mushrooms. You shouldn't soak any mushrooms because they really absorb the water. You take a mushroom brush or you just brush off any grit or anything on it, and you really don't want to soak them.
They're totally organic, so you don't.
Yeah,
wash
and when you're using them, you just take your stem and twist it off, and then you slice your caps any way you want to use them.
But save the stem?
Save the stem because really a lot of the medicinal, the goodness, the medicinal value of the mushroom, a lot of it's in the stems. So what we do, a lot of people we use them for cooking soup stock and cooking because they're a little tough. But what we do, we dry them, dehydrate them, and grind them up, put them in our food supplements, a thickening agent, and we use it all. We'll cut off some of the woody part sometime on the end and discard that. But this is them, and there ain't nothing better.
This is Teresa, Jack's wife, and she's also big on the grinding and the preparing of the mushroom, and she might say a few words about what she's got in her hands.
Well, I just went over and picked some oyster mushrooms. We also grow those, and they're a real tasty mushroom. They're a lot more mellow than the shiitake. The shiitake has more of a little bit stronger and a woodsy flavor. But the oysters are a lot milder, and some people like putting them in eggs, or actually you can put them in anything else that you would the shiitake. They're delicious.
Okay, tell us something about the growth potential for Appalachia, which really needs different forms of employment. What do you think about mushroom growing in our region?
Well, and I've always encouraged my neighbors and friends to consider growing mushrooms, certainly for your home use. I mean, everybody has a tomato garden in the backyard. Everybody here in Appalachia should have several dozen mushroom logs. It's really easy to do, something we all could do. But in reality, Appalachia, Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, we have the perfect climate for growing these woodland mushrooms. We have the temperature, and we have plenty of moisture, and we have all the oak logs that you could possibly use.
And you use recycled materials. That's another thing. There's a lot of excess that we have in our woodworking and forestry areas that could be used as recycled material.
Absolutely. You're using a resource that normally wouldn't be used other than firewood. The size diameter logs are available right now, just are not being utilized at all. So we got a waste material essentially that we could use. Appalachia could easily become the mushroom capital of the world. We have the people that need the work. We got the materials to grow it on. We got the climate. We really, I mean, it's a great area of agricultural growth, I think, in Appalachia. And again, when I'm getting my logs, I'll do what they call timber stand improvement in my woodlands, where I'm going in there, like I mentioned earlier, I'm thinning them out. Our woodlands in Appalachia really need some better management. We need to thin them out. We need to get in there and take out invasive species. We need to get out the sick and damaged trees. I mean, we have a great potential in our woodlands in Appalachia, and that could provide income and ecological benefits immensely. And if we managed them, took care of our woodlands better. And shiitake mushrooms, woodland mushrooms, is a perfect avenue, I think, for this type of growth.
Thank you very much, Jack and
Sure.
Teresa, for
Thank you.
spending some time with you. And I think our public viewing audience will really take some hints from this as to what they can do.
Good
And
deal.
mushrooms grow not only in Appalachia, but also in good parts of the United States, don't they?
Absolutely.
And with a little more care and sometimes because of drought or heat. But I think everyone will be very interested
Good.
in seeing how to grow shiitake mushroom.
I hope so.